What happens when a single irreversible act of arrogance collides with a universe of silent, hidden power? On Aura Airlines. Flight 715. From New York to London, the metallic click of a closing overhead bin was the last normal sound anyone would hear in first class. What followed was a moment of shocking violence, the sharp, ugly crack of a hand striking a face. A pilot, a man of supposed authority and control, slapping a young black woman. He saw a nobody, someone who didn't belong. He had no idea he had just assaulted his boss, the airline's secret owner, and in doing so had signed the death warrant for his own career and the entire company as he knew it. This isn't a story about revenge. It's a story about consequences. The first-class cabin of Aura Airlines Flight 715 was an oasis of curated tranquility. The gentle hum of the Rolls-Royce engines was a lullaby for the wealthy, a low thrum that promised a smooth journey across the Atlantic. The scent of warm towels infused with lavender and eucalyptus mingled with the subtle notes of expensive perfume and aged leather. Here at 35,000 feet, the world and its troubles were meant to feel distant, a messy landscape blurred by speed and altitude. In seat 1A, nestled by the window, sat Serafina Hayes. To the casual observer, she was an anomaly in this sea of bespoke suits and designer handbags. She was dressed in a simple charcoal grey cashmere hoodie, tailored black joggers and a pair of pristine but unassuming white leather sneakers. Her hair was pulled back in a neat, intricate braid that fell down her back. No flashy jewelry save for a simple, elegant watch with a plain black band on her wrist, a Patek Philippe Calatrava, a detail so understated it was practically invisible to the untrained eye. On her lap rested not a glossy magazine, but a tablet displaying complex differential equations related to fluid dynamics. Her brow was furrowed in concentration, her finger occasionally tracing a line of code on the screen. She was 28 years old, and she possessed a stillness that was often mistaken for timidity. It was, in fact, the profound calm of a mind that operated on a different plane, a mind that had built a multi-billion-dollar empire before her 25th birthday by creating a data compression algorithm that now powered nearly every major streaming and cloud service on the planet. After selling her company, Nexus Data, for a sum that made headlines in the financial world, she had vanished from the public eye. She funneled her fortune into a private equity firm, Helios Capital, a ghost entity that acquired struggling but promising companies, nurturing them from the shadows. Aura Airlines was one of her biggest acquisitions. It was a distressed asset she believed in, a company she was trying to rebuild from the inside out, focusing on quality and a renewed sense of purpose. She had never set foot in its headquarters, never met its CEO in person. Her correspondence was exclusively through her lead counsel. Today she was flying as a customer, an anonymous passenger, to experience her investment firsthand. She believed you could learn more from a single flight in seat 1A than from 100 quarterly reports. A flight attendant approached her, smile polished and professional. Her name tag read, "Chloe. Miss, can I get you a pre-departure beverage? Some champagne, perhaps?" Chloe asked, her voice soft. Serafina looked up from her tablet, her focus shifting slowly. "Just some sparkling water with a slice of lemon, please. Thank you, Chloe." She had said the name unconsciously, a habit of acknowledging the person in front of her. Chloe's smile widened slightly, genuinely pleased at being seen as more than just part of the uniform. "Of course, miss. Right away." As Chloe turned to prepare the drink, a man in his late 50s with a florid face and a stomach that strained the buttons of his expensive shirt huffed as he tried to jam an oversized carry-on into the overhead bin across the aisle. It wouldn't fit. "This is ridiculous." he grumbled to no one in particular. They make these bins smaller every year. Chloe returned with Seraphina's water. Sir, I'd be happy to check that for you. It can be brought up to the gate right when we land in London. The man scoffed. And let the baggage handlers get their greasy paws all over it. This is a Louis Vuitton sweetheart. It costs more than your car. Chloe's smile tightened, but she maintained her composure. I understand, sir. Unfortunately, it does exceed the size limits for carry-on luggage. It's a safety regulation. Before the man could retort, Seraphina spoke, her voice calm, and not even looking up from her tablet. She's right. In the event of sudden decompression, an object of that mass could become a projectile. Federal Aviation Administration Regulation 121-589 is quite specific about it. The cabin fell silent. The man stared at her. Chloe looked surprised. And who the hell are you? The man snapped his face, reddening. The Air Marshal. Seraphina finally lifted her eyes. They were a deep, intelligent brown, and they held his gaze without a flicker of intimidation. I'm a passenger who prefers not to get bludgeoned by overpriced luggage. Please let the flight attendant do her job. Her tone was not aggressive, but it was laden with an unshakable finality. Humiliated and outmaneuvered, the man thrust the bag at Chloe with a sigh of theatrical defeat. Fine, whatever. Just don't scratch it. Chloe shot Seraphina a look of immense gratitude before walking away with the bag. Seraphina simply nodded and returned to her equations the minor conflict already forgotten, a solved variable in a much larger calculation. She took a sip of her water, the small victory tasting of nothing more than lemon and bubbles. She was here to observe the mechanics of her airline in motion, the crew, the service, the hardware. She had no idea that the system's greatest flaw was about to walk out of the cockpit and introduce himself. The boarding process was nearly complete when the cockpit door opened. Out strode Captain Robert Sterling. He was a man cast from the mold of the golden age of aviation, tall, square-jawed with silvering temples, and a deep, booming voice he used like a cudgel. His uniform was immaculate, the 4 gold bars on his epaulets gleaming under the soft cabin lights. He carried with him an air of supreme, unassailable authority. To him, the plane was not a commercial vehicle. It was his kingdom, and everyone on board, from the first-class passengers to the crew, were his subjects. He didn't emerge for a safety check or to greet the passengers with a reassuring smile. He was heading to the galley to get what he called a proper coffee, scorning the automated machine in the cockpit. As he passed through the cabin, his eyes did a quick dismissive sweep, cataloguing the passengers. His gaze lingered for a moment on the man who had argued about his luggage, giving him a slight man-to-man nod of understanding. Then his eyes fell on Seraphina in seat 1A. He saw a young black woman in a hoodie. His mind, a well-oiled machine of ingrained prejudice, made a series of instantaneous calculations. She was either a celebrity's assistant, a competition winner, or someone who had used a family member's frequent flyer miles to snag a seat where she clearly didn't belong. His lip curled ever so slightly. He had seen a slow erosion of standards over his 30 years of flying, and to him this was the perfect embodiment of it. First class used to mean something. It used to have a dress code. He noticed her tablet. He couldn't see the complex math, only the glow of a screen. Probably watching some reality show, he thought. He continued to the galley where Chloe was arranging glasses. "Chloe," he boomed, making her jump. "The coffee up front tastes like battery acid. Brew me a fresh French press. Dark roast." "Of course, Captain," she said, her professional demeanor snapping back into place. "Right away." "And what was the commotion about earlier?" he asked, leaning against the counter as if holding court. "Something about a bag. A passenger's carry-on was too large, Captain. It's been handled, Chloe said concisely, not wanting to gossip. Looked like you were having trouble. Sterling pressed. You have to be firm with these people. Give them an inch, they'll take a mile, especially the ones who aren't used to this kind of service. His meaning was clear. Chloe felt a prickle of discomfort. Everyone has been very cooperative, Captain. But Sterling wasn't listening. His attention was drawn back into the cabin. Serafina had finished her water and had placed the empty glass on the small ledge beside her seat. It was a minor breach of etiquette. The glass should have been placed on the coaster, but she was engrossed in her work and hadn't given it a second thought. To Captain Sterling, this was a nail looking for a hammer. This was the breakdown of order he so despised. He strode back into the cabin, his polished black shoes clicking on the floor. He stopped directly in front of Serafina's seat, his large frame casting a shadow over her. She didn't notice him at first, her finger still tracing a line of logic on her screen. "Miss," he said, his voice loud enough for the surrounding passengers to hear. Serafina looked up, her concentration broken. She saw the 4 bars on his shoulder, the imposing figure, the stern look on his face. "Yes, your glass," he said, pointing a thick finger at it. "This isn't a bus station. We have coasters for a reason. It prevents water rings on the finish." Serafina glanced at the glass, then at the empty coaster a few inches away. A minor oversight. "My apologies," she said, her voice neutral. She reached for the glass, but Sterling was faster. He snatched the glass up. "The flight attendants are not your maids. They have more important things to do, like ensuring the safety of this aircraft than cleaning up after people who don't know how to behave." The public nature of the rebuke, the sheer condescension in his tone, was designed to humiliate. A few passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The man with the Vuitton bag watched with a smirk. Serafina felt a slow burn of anger, but she kept her expression placid. She had dealt with men like Robert Sterling her entire life, men who used their slivers of authority to feel powerful men who saw her skin, color, and gender before they ever saw her mind. Screaming would accomplish nothing. It would only confirm his biases. "I have already apologized, Captain," she said, her voice dropping a register, becoming colder, more precise. "Your point has been made. I would appreciate it if you would return to your duties." This was not the response he expected. He expected flustered apologies, maybe even tears. What he got was a dismissal. She, this girl in a hoodie, was dismissing him. "My duties," he said with a low, menacing laugh, "include ensuring a comfortable and orderly environment for my paying first-class passengers. Some people, it seems, need to be reminded of the standards." "And your standards include berating a passenger over a misplaced glass." Serafina countered, her gaze unwavering. "That seems like a rather inefficient use of your time, especially during final boarding preparations." She had pricked his ego. He felt his authority being questioned in front of his passengers. His face, already ruddy, began to darken. "Listen, sweetheart," he snarled, leaning down, invading her personal space. "I don't know what kind of lucky break got you this seat, but you are a guest on my aircraft. My aircraft, my rules. You will show me and my crew the proper respect." Do you understand me? The word sweetheart was the final straw. It was a pat on the head and a slap in the face, all at once. Serafina slowly placed her tablet on the seat beside her. She stood up, a fluid, deliberate motion. She was not a tall woman, but she stood with a posture that radiated an authority far older and deeper than the kind stitched onto a uniform. She met his gaze, and for the first time, Sterling saw something in her eyes that wasn't fear or awe, but a cold, hard assessment. It was the look of a predator sizing up a threat. "I understand you perfectly, Captain," she said, her voice dangerously quiet. "You are a man who confuses his title with his character. You are unprofessional, and frankly, you are a liability to this airline's brand. Now please step aside." It was a declaration of war. And Captain Robert Sterling, a man who had never backed down from a fight in his life, was about to make the biggest mistake of his career. The first-class cabin had become a theater of silent, mortified witnesses. The hushed conversations had ceased, replaced by the electric tension of a confrontation that had spiraled far beyond a misplaced water glass. Every eye was fixed on the standoff between the imposing uniformed pilot and the calm, unyielding young woman in seat 1A. Chloe, holding the French press in the galley, watched with a growing sense of dread. Her training screamed at her to intervene, to de-escalate, but the sheer force of the captain's personality was paralyzing. He was known for his temper, for writing up crew members for the smallest infractions. Challenging him in front of passengers was career suicide. Sterling felt the blood pounding in his ears. Liability brand. This girl, who looked like she couldn't afford a ticket in coach, was lecturing him about the airline's brand. The audacity was breathtaking. All his frustrations a mortgage that was squeezing him dry, a son who had just dropped out of college, a nagging feeling of being a relic in a world that no longer valued men like him, coalesced into a single point of white-hot rage directed entirely at Serafina. "You have no idea who you're talking to." He seethed, his voice a low growl. His face was inches from hers now, his breath smelling of stale coffee and self-importance. "On the contrary," Serafina replied, her voice remaining unnervingly steady. "I know exactly who I'm talking to. Your name is Robert Sterling. You've been a captain for 22 years. You have 2 FAA commendations for handling engine failures in the 90s and 3 formal passenger complaints for aggressive behavior in the last 5 years alone. Your file is quite detailed. If a statement could be a physical blow, that was it. Sterling recoiled as if she had struck him. How could she possibly know that the complaints were supposed to be internal, buried by the union? A cold sliver of fear pierced his anger. Who was she? Was she an FAA inspector, a corporate auditor? His mind scrambled for a rational explanation. She must have looked him up somehow. A lucky guess, a bluff. He couldn't let her win. He couldn't let her expose him. He had to reassert his dominance immediately and decisively. "You're clever." He spat, his fear twisting back into fury. "You think you can intimidate me with a few bits of information you scraped off the internet. You're out of your league, girl. This is the real world, and on this plane, I am the law. The law is governed by protocols and regulations, which you are currently violating." Serafina stated her tone that of a professor correcting a particularly dense student. "Your behavior is erratic and unprofessional. For the safety of this flight, I am requesting that you return to the cockpit and allow the first officer to handle the departure." It was a perfectly reasonable, logical request, and it was the most insulting thing she could have possibly said. She had not only challenged his authority, she had questioned his competence to fly the plane. She had, in his mind, tried to strip him of his very identity. Something inside Robert Sterling snapped. The sequence of events seemed to happen in horrifying slow motion. He raised his right hand, the one adorned with a chunky gold ring. His arm moved through the air, a blur of navy blue and gold. The passengers gasped a collective intake of breath. Chloe took an involuntary step forward from the galley, a small "no" escaping her lips. Serafina saw it coming. Her eyes widened, not in fear, but in disbelief. She had calculated the probabilities, analyzed his psychological profile based on his actions. She had predicted a verbal explosion, perhaps an attempt to have her forcibly removed. She had not factored in physical assault. It was an irrational variable, a catastrophic system failure. The sharp, ugly crack of his hand, connecting with her cheek, echoed through the silent cabin. It was not a gentle tap or a shove. It was a full, open-handed slap, delivered with the force of a man who had lost all control. The impact snapped her head to the side, her intricate braid whipping through the air. For a single stunning heartbeat, there was absolute silence. The only sound was the ever-present indifferent hum of the engines. A bright, angry red mark began to bloom on Serafina's cheek. She slowly, deliberately turned her head back to face him. Her eyes were wide, and in their depths, the cold, analytical calm had been replaced by something far more terrifying, the still silent fury of a supernova about to detonate. She didn't cry out. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even touch her cheek. She just stared at him. And in that silent, unwavering gaze, Captain Robert Sterling finally understood that he had not just slapped a passenger. He had crossed a line, and on the other side of that line was a world of consequences he could not possibly begin to comprehend. The smirk on the Vuitton bag owner's face had vanished, replaced by a slack-jawed expression of shock. Another passenger, a woman in her 60s, was already fumbling for her phone. The spell was broken by Chloe, who rushed forward, placing herself between them. "Captain, that's enough," she cried, her voice trembling but firm. "Please step back." Sterling blinked, as if coming out of a trance. He looked at his own hand, then at the red mark on Serafina's face. A flicker of panic entered his eyes, but it was quickly stamped out by a desperate need to justify his actions. He couldn't have been wrong. She had provoked him. "This passenger is a security threat." He boomed his voice, straining to sound authoritative. "She was insubordinate. She was threatening. She is to be removed from my aircraft. Now." He pointed a shaking finger at Serafina. "You get your things. You are not flying on Aura Airlines today or ever again." Serafina held his gaze for one more long, chilling moment. Then she gave a single, almost imperceptible nod. She turned and calmly picked up her tablet and her small, nondescript backpack from the seat. She didn't argue. She didn't protest. As she walked towards the open door of the plane, she paused beside Chloe. She looked at the horrified young flight attendant and spoke in a voice that was quiet, but carried the weight of an iron promise. "Thank you for your professionalism, Chloe," she said. Then she looked past her, her eyes finding Captain Sterling one last time. "This," she said, her voice clear and cold, cutting through the stunned silence, "will be handled." And with that she stepped off the plane, leaving behind a first-class cabin in chaos, a terrified flight crew, and a captain who was utterly, hopelessly, and completely doomed. The jet bridge felt like a strange, sterile limbo between the rarefied air of first class and the bustling reality of the JFK terminal. Serafina Hayes walked with a steady, unhurried pace, her backpack slung over one shoulder. The stinging on her cheek had subsided into a dull, throbbing ache, a physical reminder of the gross violation that had just occurred. But her mind was already past the pain, past the humiliation. It was moving with the terrifying speed and clarity that had made her a billionaire. She wasn't processing emotion. She was processing data, calculating responses, and initiating protocols. As she reached the gate agent's desk, the agent, a flustered man named David, was already on the phone, likely getting a garbled version of events from the flight crew. He looked up and saw her, his eyes widening at the distinct red handprint on her face. "Mamai, the captain said—" He stammered, unsure of what to do. Serafina held up a hand, a simple gesture that commanded silence. "I require no assistance from you," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. "Just tell me one thing. What is the tail number of that aircraft? The tail number. David blinked, confused by the request. It's N418AU. November 418 Alpha Uniform, she repeated, committing it to memory. Thank you. She walked away from the gate, ignoring the curious and pitying stares of other passengers. She found a quiet corner of the terminal, pulled out her phone, and bypassed her usual contacts, her thumb hovering over a single encrypted entry in her address book, Benjamin Carter. Benjamin Carter was less a lawyer and more of a weapon. He was the senior partner at the most powerful and discreet law firm in New York. He was the public face of Helios Capital, the man who handled the acquisitions, the negotiations, the liquidations. He was a man who spoke in billion-dollar figures and ironclad contracts, and whose loyalty to Serafina was absolute. He had known her since she was a teenage prodigy, coding in her dorm room. He answered on the first ring. Sarah, is everything all right? You're supposed to be in the air. There's been an alteration to my travel plans, Ben. She said, her voice a flat line of controlled fury. What happened? He asked, his tone instantly shifting from collegial to razor-sharp. I've been assaulted and ejected from Flight 715, an Aura Airlines aircraft tail number N418AU. The assailant was the pilot Captain Robert Sterling. There was a dead silence on the other end of the line. Benjamin Carter was a man who had heard everything from hostile takeover threats to government investigations, but this left him momentarily speechless. Assaulted, he finally said the word, dripping with disbelief and menace. Are you injured? Do you need medical attention? I can have a team there in 10 minutes. The injury is superficial, Serafina replied. The insult, however, is systemic. This isn't about one man's temper, Ben. This is a symptom of a corporate culture I have failed to properly assess, a culture that has now put its hands on me. Benjamin understood immediately. This wasn't a personal lawsuit she was contemplating. This was a business problem, and Serafina Hayes solved business problems with overwhelming and decisive force. What are your orders? He asked. Initiate Helios Protocol. Serafina commanded. The name was one they had created for a worst-case scenario, a complete and total activation of her power as a majority shareholder. I want a full immediate asset review of Aura Airlines. I'm invoking Emergency Clause 17B of the shareholder agreement, the one regarding gross negligence endangering the primary stakeholder. It allows for a unilateral freezing of executive authority pending a full board review. Benjamin's pen could be heard scratching furiously. Clause 17B, the God Mode Clause. Understood. The CIO, Daniel Harrison, will be legally paralyzed by the time he finishes his morning coffee. What else? I want Captain Robert Sterling's entire professional and personal history on my desk within the hour. FAA records, union grievances, financial statements, social media, everything. I want to know the brand of toothpaste he uses. I want the flight crew of 791 grounded in London, pending interviews. Specifically the flight attendant named Chloe Martinez. Ensure she is protected. She attempted to de-escalate. She is an asset. Consider it done, Benjamin said. And Ben, Serafina added, her voice dropping lower, contact the FAA. Inform them an unnamed high-level corporate auditor was just assaulted by a pilot on a commercial flight, and that the airline is attempting to cover it up by labeling the auditor a security threat. They won't know it's me, but it will put Sterling's license under immediate review and prevent the airline from burying the incident report. A slow, predatory smile could almost be heard in Benjamin's voice. That's brilliant. It will tie them in knots. They'll be investigating themselves while we dismantle them from the inside. Sarah, I'm sorry this happened. Don't be sorry. Serafina said, her gaze turning steely as she looked out the window at the plane, her plane sitting on the tarmac. Be effective. She ended the call. Meanwhile, on board, Flight 759, Captain Sterling was striding back to the cockpit, his chest puffed out. He had neutralized the threat, put the upstart in her place, and re-established order. He felt powerful. He felt vindicated. "Everything all right, Bob?" asked his first officer, a younger man named Mike, who had heard the commotion. "Just had to remove some trash," Sterling grunted, settling into his seat. "Some people just don't understand how the world works." He pushed the throttle forward, and the massive engines of the Airbus A350 began to spool up with a deafening roar. As the plane accelerated down the runway, lifting gracefully into the sky, Robert Sterling had no idea that he was flying a ghost ship. He thought he was the king in his castle, but he was merely a pilot in a multi-million-dollar asset that, thanks to a single phone call, no longer truly belonged to his employers. It belonged to the woman he had just slapped, and her judgment was coming far faster than the speed of sound. The next morning, London was draped in its typical grey drizzle. In a gleaming tower in Canary Wharf, Daniel Harrison, the COO of Aura Airlines, was having a spectacular day. He stood before his executive board in a room with a panoramic view of the city, his hands gesturing emphatically at a series of upward trending charts on a massive screen. "As you can see, gentlemen," he said, his voice smooth and confident, "our Q3 passenger satisfaction scores are up by 12%. Our on-time departure rates are the best in the industry. The Aura brand is not just recovering, it's soaring." Harrison was a man who lived and breathed brand identity. He was handsome, charismatic, and impeccably dressed in a Savile Row suit. He saw Aura Airlines not as a transportation company, but as a curator of luxury experiences. He was brilliant at marketing, passable at logistics, and completely oblivious to the rot that could fester in the deeper levels of his own company. He knew, of course, about the airline's silent majority owner. He knew they were represented by a notoriously ruthless firm called Helios Capital, and he knew their lead counsel. Benjamin Carter was a man you did not want to receive a call from, but the arrangement had been perfect for him. The owner remained anonymous, pouring in capital and demanding only one thing in return: results. And Harrison was delivering those results. As the meeting droned on, his personal assistant tiptoed in and placed a tablet in front of him with an urgent message flagged in red. From legal. Subject urgent. Helios Capital. Mr. Carter has invoked Emergency Clause 17B. An emergency virtual board meeting has been called for 11:00 a.m. GMT. Attendance is mandatory. Harrison felt a jolt of ice water in his veins. Clause 17. B. He vaguely recalled his legal team briefing him on it when the Helios deal was finalized. It was a doomsday provision, something so extreme it was considered a mere formality. It effectively gave the majority owner the power to seize control of the company under extraordinary circumstances. "Excuse me," he said to the board, his confident smile faltering for the first time. "A pressing matter has arisen. We'll reconvene this afternoon." He rushed back to his office, his heart hammering against his ribs. What could have possibly happened? A plane crash? A massive FAA fine. He dialed his head of legal, a perpetually worried man named George. "George, what in God's name is happening? Helios just invoked the Apocalypse Clause." "I don't know, Daniel." George squeaked his voice, tinny over the speakerphone. Carter's office was impenetrable. They just said there was a catastrophic failure in operational integrity and that all executive authority is suspended until the 11 a.m. meeting. They're demanding the presence of the head of flight operations and the pilot union representative as well. As Harrison was trying to process this, another call came through. It was from his operations manager at JFK. Mr. Harrison, sir, we have a situation. The FAA just grounded the entire flight crew of yesterday's 7:15 to London. They're citing an ongoing investigation into a pilot-initiated incident, and Captain Sterling's license has been suspended pending review. Harrison's mind reeled. Flight 7:15. He vaguely recalled a minor incident report coming in overnight. The report said Sterling removed a disruptive passenger, a non-revenue flyer on a buddy pass. That's it. Standard procedure. Well, sir, the manager said nervously, the FAA is acting like it was something else entirely. And there's more. We have a dozen emails from first-class passengers on that flight. They're all using words like appalling, violent, and assault. Several of them recorded video. The word video made Harrison's blood run cold. Uncontrolled documentation was his worst nightmare. Get me that video, and get me Captain Sterling. Where is he? He's in his hotel room in London, sir. I spoke to him an hour ago. He was bragging. Said he put a freeloader in her place, and was proud of it. Harrison slammed his hand on his mahogany desk. A single arrogant pilot was about to torpedo his entire career. He was still convinced this was a containable PR crisis, an overzealous captain, an unfortunate incident. They would issue a profound apology, offer the wronged passenger a lifetime of free flights and fire Sterling in a very public, dramatic fashion. It was manageable. He had absolutely no idea that the disruptive passenger and the silent, all-powerful owner who had just frozen his company were one and the same person. He was walking into the 11 a.m. meeting, armed with a water pistol, about to face a tactical nuclear strike. He was a man sleepwalking into his own execution, utterly oblivious to the identity of his executioner. At precisely 11:00 a.m., GMT, a secure video conference link went live. On the screen, a dozen windows popped up, each containing the grim, anxious face of an Aura Airlines executive. Daniel Harrison was in the center, flanked by his head of legal and his COO. The head of flight operations was patched in from another office, looking pale. The pilot union rep, a bulldog of a man named Frank, looked defiant and ready for a fight. One window on the grid remained black, labeled only Helios Capital. The tension was thick enough to taste. They waited. For 2 full minutes, nothing happened. The silence was a power move designed to unnerve them, and it was working perfectly. Finally, the black window flickered to life. The face that appeared was that of Benjamin Carter, seated in a minimalist office with a view of Central Park behind him. He looked calm, rested, and about as friendly as a shark. "Good morning, gentlemen." Benjamin began, his voice smooth as silk and just as strong. "Thank you for joining us. We are here today because of a catastrophic incident that occurred yesterday on Aura Airlines Flight 715, an asset of my client." Daniel Harrison immediately jumped in, adopting his most conciliatory, in-control CEO voice. "Benjamin Daniel Harrison here. Let me be the first to say that we are taking this matter with the utmost seriousness. The actions of Captain Sterling were unacceptable, and I can assure you that we have already begun the process of terminating his employment. This was an isolated incident, the regrettable action of one bad actor." Benjamin held up a single manicured finger, and Harrison's voice trailed off as if he'd been muted. "Daniel," Benjamin said, his tone chillingly polite, "you will speak when I invite you to speak. Right now you will listen. You seem to be under the misapprehension that this is a negotiation or a damage control session. It is not. This is a debriefing on the failure of your leadership and the subsequent restructuring of your company." The union rep, Frank, bristled. "Now hold on a minute. Captain Sterling is a 30-year veteran. He's entitled to due process. We haven't even heard his side of the story." "His side of the story is irrelevant," Benjamin cut in sharply. Because we have something better. We have video." He shared his screen. The shaky but horribly clear cell phone footage filled the virtual meeting room. They all watched in stunned silence. They saw Captain Sterling lean in. They saw him snarl. They saw Serafina stand up to him. They heard her calm, precise takedown of his professional record. And then they saw the slap. The sickening crack was audible even through the laptop speakers. A collective groan went through the executives. Harrison buried his face in his hands. It was infinitely worse than he had imagined. As you can see, Benjamin continued removing the video. This was not a disruptive passenger. This was a gross abuse of power, a physical assault, and a complete failure of every protocol your airline purports to uphold. The passenger in question was calm, rational, and was, in fact, attempting to de-escalate your captain's unhinged tirade. Harrison saw his opening, a chance to show he was on the right side. "This is indefensible," he said, his voice filled with theatrical outrage. "Aura Airlines has a zero-tolerance policy for this. We will, of course, be reaching out to the victim to offer our deepest apologies and a comprehensive compensation package." Benjamin Carter smiled. It was not a pleasant sight. "I'm glad you brought that up, Daniel, because my client felt it was important that you deliver your apology to her directly. She has decided to join this meeting." A sense of confusion rippled through the executives. Why would the victim of the assault be in a high-level emergency board meeting? Another window on the grid, previously black, flickered on. The camera activated, revealing the face of Serafina Hayes. She was in what looked like a home office, a simple white wall behind her. She wore a plain black turtleneck. The lighting was perfect, and it did nothing to hide the faint, yellowish-purple bruise that was now visible on her left cheek. Daniel Harrison stared at the screen. His brain stuttered. He recognized her instantly from the video. The woman in the hoodie. The victim. He opened his mouth to offer his carefully rehearsed, heartfelt apology. But before he could utter a word, Benjamin Carter spoke again, his voice ringing with grim finality. "Gentlemen, allow me to formally introduce you to the principal owner of Helios Capital, the silent backer of this airline, and the woman your pilot assaulted yesterday. This is Ms. Serafina Hayes. She owns 58% of your company. Daniel, you work for her." The world tilted on its axis. Every jaw in the virtual room dropped. The union rep looked like he'd been tasered. George, the head of legal, went completely white. Daniel Harrison felt the floor drop out from beneath him. His mind frantically tried to connect the dots, the girl in the hoodie, the calm defiance, the encyclopedic knowledge of Sterling's record, "this will be handled," the invocation of Clause 17B. It all slammed into him with the force of a physical blow. The disruptive passenger he had been planning to buy off with a few first-class tickets was the invisible billionaire who held his entire career in the palm of her hand. He looked from Benjamin Carter's smug face to Serafina's bruised, impassive one. The polished, charismatic CEO persona dissolved, replaced by the raw, primal fear of a man staring into the face of his own professional ruin. He had not just failed his company. He had allowed his company to physically assault its own queen. For a full 30 seconds, the only sound in the virtual meeting was the frantic, panicked breathing of a dozen executives. They were all staring at the face of Serafina Hayes, a face they had seen only moments before in a grainy video, a face they now understood represented the ultimate authority. Finally, Serafina spoke. Her voice was not loud, not filled with rage or emotion. It was something far more terrifying. It was calm, measured, and utterly devoid of mercy. It was the voice of a scientist observing a failed experiment. "Mr. Harrison," she began, her eyes locking onto his through the camera. For 2 years I have allowed you to run my company. I have read your reports, listened to your optimistic projections, and approved your budgets. I trusted that the culture you were building, the aura of excellence you so fondly describe in your press releases, was more than just marketing copy. She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Yesterday I learned that it is a lie. A dangerous, toxic lie. She turned her head, slightly making sure the bruise on her cheek was fully visible. This, she said, gesturing to her face, is not my injury. This is your quarterly report. This is the result of a culture where arrogance is mistaken for authority, where employees feel empowered to abuse customers based on their appearance. This is a symptom of your failed leadership. Daniel Harrison found his voice a weak, reedy thing he barely recognized. Ms. Hayes, Serafina, I am horrified. I am speechless. There are no words to express how profoundly sorry I am. This is a betrayal of everything we stand for. Stop, Serafina commanded, cutting him off mid-grovel. Do not tell me what you stand for. I will tell you what you stand for. You stand for a system that protected a pilot with 3 prior complaints of aggression. You stand for a system where a flight attendant, Chloe Martinez, was too intimidated to intervene against her superior, despite her training. You stand for a system where not a single other first-class passenger felt safe enough to step in until after an assault had already occurred. Your system is broken, Mr. Harrison, from the top down. She then turned her attention to the union representative. Mr. Franklin, your union will not be representing Robert Sterling. Helios Capital's legal team will be filing a civil suit against him for assault and battery. Furthermore, we will be providing the FAA with evidence and testimony that will ensure his pilot's license is permanently revoked. If your union attempts to obstruct this process in any way, I will interpret it as a direct endorsement of his actions, and I will begin the process of exploring contract renegotiations with a different labor group. Is that clear? Frank the Bulldog looked utterly deflated. He had come prepared to fight for his pilot. He now understood he was fighting a tidal wave. He simply nodded, mute. Finally, Serafina's cold, calculating gaze returned to Daniel Harrison. I have 2 options, Daniel. The first is that I liquidate my majority stake. I sell all 58% of my shares at once. The market will panic, the stock will plummet to nothing, and Aura Airlines will cease to exist by Christmas. The board will be disgraced, you will be unemployed, and thousands of people will lose their jobs. She let that sink in. The color drained from Harrison's face. The second option, she continued, is that you remain for now as a figurehead CEO. But your authority is revoked. From this moment on, you answer to me. And we are going to burn the old Aura Airlines to the ground and build something new from the ashes. She laid out her terms, each one a hammer blow to the company's old way of doing business. First, Robert Sterling is as of this second fired for cause with a public statement detailing his actions. His pension is forfeit as per the gross misconduct clause in his contract. Second, you will establish a new independent civilian oversight and inclusivity board. It will have final authority on hiring, firing, and training protocols for all staff, from pilots to gate agents. Its first director will be a candidate of my choosing. Third, you will immediately implement the sanctuary cabin protocol. Any employee who reports misconduct by a superior will be granted immediate anonymous protection from retaliation, with their case reviewed by the new oversight board, not their direct managers. Fourth, Chloe Martinez, the flight attendant from Flight 715, is to be given a promotion and a substantial bonus. She will also be offered a lead role in developing the new cabin crew de-escalation training program. We reward competence and courage. Finally, she said, leaning slightly closer to her camera, you will issue a public company-wide apology. In it, you will not mention a disruptive passenger. You will state clearly that a pilot assaulted a black woman in first class, and that the company failed her and its own standards completely. We will not hide behind vague language. We will own our failure. She leaned back. You have 60 seconds to accept these terms, Daniel. If you do not, my broker has a standing order to begin the sell-off at 11:15 a.m. It wasn't a choice. It was a surrender. Daniel Harrison, the smooth, confident CEO, was broken. He looked at the faces of his fellow executives, seeing his own terror mirrored back at him. They all knew their careers, their fortunes, their entire professional lives now depended on the will of the woman in the black turtleneck. We accept, Harrison croaked, his voice barely a whisper. We accept all of your terms. Serafina Hayes gave a single sharp nod. The cold, analytical expression returned to her face. The reckoning was over. The reconstruction was about to begin. The fallout was immediate and brutal. Within an hour, Aura Airlines released a press statement that sent shockwaves through the industry. It was unprecedented in its honesty and self-incrimination. It named Captain Robert Sterling, detailed his assault on an unnamed black female passenger, and announced his immediate termination and the company's full cooperation with both civil and federal investigations. For Robert Sterling, the news came not from the company, but from a CNN alert on his phone as he sat in his London hotel room drinking a whiskey and feeling sorry for himself. He saw his own name, his picture next to the words, assault, disgrace, and terminated. His 30-year career had been executed in a single paragraph. His union, the one he had paid dues to his entire life, sent him a terse email, stating that due to the extraordinary circumstances, they would not be representing him. He was alone. The phone began to ring. Reporters, old colleagues, his horrified wife back in Connecticut. He didn't answer. He just stared at the wall, the full weight of his colossal miscalculation finally crushing him. He hadn't disciplined a freeloader. He had punched the sun. Back in New York, Serafina worked with the precision of a master architect, redesigning a condemned building. Benjamin Carter's legal team descended on Aura's headquarters not as adversaries, but as the new authority. They papered over the old executive structure, implementing Serafina's new protocols with ruthless efficiency. The Civilian Oversight and Inclusivity Board was formed within a week. Its new director was Dr. Anya Sharma, a renowned sociologist and expert on corporate culture, whom Serafina had tried to hire for her first company years ago. Dr. Sharma was given a blank check and an ironclad mandate: fix this. Chloe Martinez received a call that she was sure was a mistake. It was from the office of the CEO. Trembling, she took the call, expecting to be fired for her role in the incident. Instead, Daniel Harrison himself, his voice humbled and strained, informed her of her promotion, her bonus, and the offer to help Dr. Sharma redesign their training program. He told her that her courage had been noted at the highest level. Chloe sat in stunned silence, tears of relief and disbelief streaming down her face. She had stood up for what was right, and for the first time in her career, the system had actually rewarded her for it. The changes rippled through the airline. Pilots and crew were pulled into mandatory intensive training sessions run by Dr. Sharma's new board. They weren't the usual boring slideshows about diversity. They were raw, uncomfortable, and effective. They used the actual video of the Sterling incident as a case study in catastrophic failure. They role-played scenarios. They forced staff to confront their own unconscious biases. There was resistance. Some older pilots grumbled about the woke new rules. A few quit in protest. They were quietly replaced. Seraphina's message was clear: evolve or become extinct. Daniel Harrison was a ghost of his former self. He was still CEO, but the power was gone. He was an administrator, tasked with executing Seraphina's vision. He sat in meetings with Dr. Sharma, nodding along to policies that a month ago he would have dismissed as corporate fluff. He had seen the abyss, looked his professional mortality in the eye, and it had changed him. He was humbled, but he was also learning. For the first time, he was thinking about his employees and passengers, not as data points on a chart, but as human beings. 3 months after the incident, Seraphina Hayes boarded another Aura Airlines flight, this time from New York to San Francisco. She was in seat 1A, wearing a similar hoodie, her tablet in her lap. The bruise was long gone, but the memory of the incident was now woven into the DNA of the airline. The flight attendant who approached her was young, bright-eyed, and new. "Welcome aboard, miss," she said with a warm, genuine smile. "Can I get you a pre-departure beverage? Sparkling water with a slice of lemon, please," Seraphina replied. As the attendant served the drink, she placed it carefully on the coaster. "We're so glad to have you flying with us today," she said. "Please let me know if there's anything at all that makes you feel unsafe or uncomfortable. We're all here to help." It was part of the new script, a core tenet of the new training, but the way she said it felt real. It was a promise. Seraphina looked at the young woman then, around the calm, professional cabin. She saw a crew that was more aware, more attentive. She saw the tangible results of her painful, necessary intervention. The system wasn't perfect, but it was no longer broken in the same way. It was healing. It was evolving. She took a sip of her water and gave the flight attendant a small, knowing smile. "Thank you," she said. "I feel perfectly safe." The engines began to roar, and as the plane climbed into the sky, it felt different. It was lighter. It was the feeling of an airline that had been through the fire and had, against all odds, been reborn. That single shocking moment on Flight 715 wasn't just about a pilot's anger or a passenger's identity. It was a story about the hidden systems of power that surround us every day. Seraphina Hayes wasn't just a billionaire. She was a reminder that you can never truly know the story of the person sitting next to you. Captain Sterling wasn't just a bully. He was the product of a culture that allowed his arrogance to grow unchecked for years. This story shows us that true change often doesn't come from polite requests. It comes from consequences. It's a powerful lesson on prejudice, accountability, and how one person's refusal to be victimized can topple an entire corrupt system. What would you have done in Seraphina's place? What do you think is the biggest lesson we can take from this? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. If this story moved you, please hit that like button, share it with someone who needs to hear it, and make sure you subscribe to the channel for more incredible real-life dramas. Your support helps us bring these powerful narratives to light. Thank you for listening.